The outlook for the Philadelphia 76ers changed in a major way when they landed the number 3 overall pick. But with Daryl Morey's tendency to tinker and make the big trades, plenty have proposed them sending out that third pick in exchange for a win now piece. However, new reports have surfaced shutting down this thought process, with plenty of intel and info coming from inside the Sixers organization about why they intend to keep the draft pick. I want to break down the exact latest on what we know and talk a little bit about why I think this would be the right choice for the Sixers overall. Now, before I dive fully into things, do want to remind you guys, as always, to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. At this point in time, 33.1% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Sixers Digest just yet. We're just getting to the hot spot, the key part of the offseason that we got plenty to get into, so I want as many people as possible to join the Sixers Digest family. Now, to dive into the exact reports, I first want to start off with this, which broke on NBA Central today. This coming from Jake Fisher initially, and we have a couple different pieces to this. And he writes, quote, "Don't expect the duo, furthermore, to be broken up. Sources say that recent reports suggesting that the Sixers will be looking to explore Georgia's trade market in conjecture with the draft pick are a misread. It has been whispered often in league circles, going back to Philadelphia's free agency ownership of George last summer, that the Sixers would not turn around and try and move their marquee acquisition in the early stages of his Philly tenure unless George asked for a deal himself." Now, this is a key part of the basketball politics that I think we overlook a lot. That free agent signings mean a lot to an organization. Every organization in the NBA wants to be looked at as a desired location, that I want to go there. There's a good reputation. They treat their players well, and that is definitely important to Daryl Morey. He's more or less said that on occasions, and even more so, I do think he speaks it with his actions. Now, you can point to examples where things haven't worked out, where he's been called a liar, all these kind of things. But when you do look at, for another example here, like Joel Embiid, giving him that extension that plenty of people have rightfully criticized here. I understand where you're coming from with the criticism, but where I think Daryl Morey landed on his calculations here is I want this to be viewed as we take care of our guys here, and Joel is still one of our guys. So that's kind of where I think he comes to this calculus. And let's not forget that when thinking about max contract free agents, Philadelphia has not quite been that destination. Now, you can point to a million different reasons why that is the case here, but the fact of the matter is Paul George is their biggest ticket free agent in really history here. You can dive back to a couple other names if you want to point to, but especially in the modern NBA, there has not been a player that Philadelphia has wanted. They outright give him an opportunity, and the guy signs on the dotted line. Now, for Paul George specifically, there was not another team willing to reach the threshold of contractual commitment that the Sixers were. That is the larger story with why he signed, but at the same time here, Philadelphia wants to cement that we take care of our guys. Daryl Morey wants to be looked at as this is an organization that players should want to go to. So there is a little bit of the politics of we're not going to sign a guy 1 year in and then trade him, is sort of what Jake Fisher is alluding to here. But we got a couple other reports that I did want to touch on as well. This coming from Draft Express, Jonathan Givony here, who writes, "It really feels like Dylan Harper is going number 2, if not to the Spurs, then to the team trading up to the number 2. But number 3 is really where it really starts to get interesting. People really want to see what Daryl Morey does here. How do the Sixers feel about Joel Embiid's long-term health? What do they do with Paul George's contract? How is that going to age? Do they make a trade? They're really starting to signal to teams around the league that they're comfortable sitting there at 3, picking a talent and building around that guy long term. And this is the exact conclusion that I wanted the Sixers to arrive on all along. Now, granted, this does not set anything in stone. It is smokescreen season for one way or another. In the same way that we've got trade reports, it very well could be Daryl Morey trying to sell the vision that all they want is the third pick in order to drive up a price point where a team has to really offer to get up there and maybe make one that he cannot refuse. But I do think it is worth telling that Jonathan Givony directly here is addressing that they are sending signals to other team. And I also think it is noteworthy how public that Daryl Morey has been in this. Now, the biggest report that I trust the most does come from our guy Sixers Adam here. Now, I know Adam a little bit. I know that he would not put out anything that he does not back 100% here, and I do think his sources are good. And he writes, "The Sixers have given, quote, no consideration to possibly trading Paul George and a 3rd overall pick for players such as Kevin Durant or Lauri Markkanen, per Sixers Adam. Quote, a league source told Philly Voice that the team has given no consideration to such possibilities to date. The team appears singularly focused on adding a premium young talent to a core featuring 24-year-old Tyrese Maxey, 21-year-old Jared McCain, and 24-year-old upcoming restricted free agent Quentin Grimes, rather than using the pick as a tool to upgrade its veteran base. And again, I do want to make it clear that it is notable to me that Quentin Grimes is mentioned in this, as for at least, the overall record, to just tell the truth here, he is not a member of the Sixers currently. He is a free agent. Now, he's a restricted free agent, which throws a little bit of an asterisk next to that, as the Sixers have a chance to match. But the fact that he was directly acknowledged in that sort of report or source there, that to me is kind of telling for the game plan here, that Quentin Grimes should be looked at as a player very much expected to come back in a Sixers uniform. Now, on top of all that, we also have not gotten any of these reports of the Sixers are falling in love with Ace Bailey, or the Sixers are heavily connected to VJ Edgecombe. And I understand it is still early in that process, but we did get this that I thought was interesting coming out. This originally, wrong section here. This originally coming from Jonathan Goney as well, as he writes, the 76ers are unsurprisingly signaling that they are looking at a wide group of prospects consisting of Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson, Kaman Malawak, and Kon Kneppel. Bailey, widely considered this draft's third most talented prospect, is the natural fit here, as he could seamlessly slide into the Sixers starting lineup at shooting guard, small forward, or power forward, operating alongside any of their current players. And I will note Gavoni very much on record as being a very pro Ace Bailey guy. He's a guy that believes him as a talent. He was asked the question directly on a podcast with Kevin O'Connor of if there was a player most likely to bust, do you believe it would be Ace Bailey? Kind of putting him on the spot, and he said absolutely not. But I do believe Ace is going to be an NBA star. Kind of rode for him as a personality. He's a guy willing to put the work in, which is all that I've heard on the Ace Bailey front as well. I will note that, and I've mentioned this before, but my opinion of him changed when I went and saw him in person. That the motor that he plays with, the desire that he plays with, that stood out to me more than the actual gameplay itself. And when you pair the physical tools that he has, the raw skill set that he has, with a guy who, by all my takeaway from that, cares about winning basketball, that's a guy I'm willing to bet on. And that's sort of how I feel about Ace Bailey. And I do think the rebounding has been an under-talked about story. He's going to be a high-level NBA defender from day one and a high-level rebounder from day one. And that's an area where the Sixers absolutely need help with. At Real Deal 6'7" and change, this is a guy who can contribute and helping out on the boards, which we've seen be problematic for years at this point. But nonetheless, to keep this on the reports here, we got one other factor that I think is really telling on the desire to keep Paul George and Joel Embiid, which is kind of the biggest story for why I think Daryl Morey sits in this exact position. And this coming from, according to Jake Fisher, the other part of this initial report, he writes, don't expect the duo, furthermore, to be broken up. Sources say that the recent reports suggesting the Sixers will be looking to explore George's trade market in conjecture with the draft are a misread. There have been no indications that they are looking to package George with the number 3 pick or try to move him on his own. The Sixers surely understand that there is little to no chance they could optimize a trade return for the 35-year-old after his injury-riddled maiden season as a Sixer, especially with 3 seasons remaining on George's deal. My guy Zach Chavalella quote tweeting us to say, trading Paul George or Joel Embiid at his lowest value has never made sense. According to Jake Fisher, the Sixers seem well aware of that fact. A lot of great info in this one for Sixers fan. And this is the real story when having the Paul George and Joel Embiid conversation. I get the frustrations. I get the reactionary take of this is not working. Burn it up. Tear it down. Start over. Try again. But when you actually think about the logistics of how this happens, there's really not a pathway to that improves this Sixers organization. That will stick with Paul George for this example here. There are 3 years of a max contract remaining on his deal. He did not perform like a max player last year. So how many teams around the league are signing on and say that is a guy that we want to pay that amount of money to? The reality is if the Sixers had that level of desire to get off the contract, you're talking about adding assets. And what I mean by that is the same thing that got us in this little predicament for this specific draft, as we were all itching at this 64% chance of the Sixers retaining their pick. The reason that they could have lost it and should have lost it, frankly, is because they traded away Al Horford and a draft pick in order to get off that money. That's what you're doing with Paul George in this current situation, but to a fuller extent. It was one thing to trade away Al Horford, which was a more manageable contract, even though probably before Paul George, that was probably the biggest free agent signing that we've seen in Philadelphia in quite some time here. But the point of being that it could be done at that time. You're paying a higher premium for the higher price point that Paul George commands at this point in the game. And when you think about actually maximizing your assets, that's none of that. That if you're paying money or paying draft picks to get actively worse as a basketball team by not taking anything back in return, essentially, of course, there's intricacies of this, that you got to take salaries, blah, 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 the details of that. But the crux of it being, you're just not maximizing your asset whatsoever. So I get the frustration, and I think Joel Embiid in a slightly different tier of all of this is that the injury risks are even more legitimate, even though there is a little bit more reason for optimism that he could return to a best player, the best player on a contending team. I don't think anyone can talk themselves into that with Paul George. But who's signing up to pay Joel Embiid $70 million 3 years from now? When we think about the current version of him that we've seen, the guy that showed up last season, how many teams are taking that gamble, and what is the price point that they're asking for in return to take on this? If we know anything about Daryl Morey, it is about maximizing the asset. None of that points to them moving off Paul George or Joel Embiid at this current point in the game. So let's not overthink things. Let's make this third overall pick, and we're still establishing that next generation, that there is a little something here with Jared McCain, with Tyrese Maxey, with Quentin Grimes, with guys like Justin Edwards, who needs more buzz for how good he was last year, and whoever you take with that third pick. This little youth movement, that next core with a lot of draft picks still coming down the pipeline here, there is a pathway to the era after Joel Embiid looking quite promising, to be honest with you. So everyone deep breaths. I don't think we're in for the blockbuster trade involving either Paul George or Joel Embiid. I am pretty certain that both those guys will be back on the Sixers roster next year, but nonetheless, stranger things have happened. So we will see what happens from here, but a little bit of a change in what the verbiage or reporting or expectation for this Sixers team as far as what has been expressed these past couple days. So let me know what you guys think about all that. Can you buy in whatsoever to Paul George and Joel Embiid returning? Do you believe that they could bring a successful season and a team by just making that third pick? Do you want to hear from you guys in the comments below? And one more time, as always, do want to remind you guys to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. Again, 66.9% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Sixers Digest just yet. So let's get this Sixers Digest family growing. Got plenty more to break down this offseason and beyond. So want everybody tapping in. Appreciate you guys for tuning in once again. Be back. Talk with you next time. Peace.